Sounds good.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. Maybe we can all do an introduction before I get started. So I'm Audria with the San Mateo Resource Conservation District. Sacha, you want to go?
Sure, I'm Sacha Lozano with the RCD of Santa Cruz County.
Casey Butler with the San Mateo Resource Conservation District.
And I'm Jim Howard, the District Conservationist with the Natural Resources Conservation Service in San Mateo County.
Casey, you want to go to the next slide? So we're gonna open up by just doing a quick introduction about resource conservation districts, have an introduction about carbon farming and what carbon farm plans are, and then go over 3 funding opportunities for funding these practices on your farms and ranches. Hearing from Jim from the Nrcs, hearing about the Healthy Soils program, and then Zero Foodprint, and then we'll have about 15 minutes, I think, for Q&A at the end. And you feel free to ask questions in the chat, but I think we're going to hold off answering those questions until we're done with our presentations. Next slide. So resource conservation districts are, they were started back in the 30s, as was the Natural Resources Conservation Service, to help farmers conserve their soil. And this was in response to the Dust Bowl. And so there's about, I think there's like 90 or 100 RCDs throughout California. And we exist in partnership with the USDA and the Nrcs to help farmers help the land, or help people help the land. And we started working with farmers and ranchers. We've expanded to all landowners and land managers. But today we're talking about the work that we do with the farmers and ranchers within San Mateo County and Santa Cruz County. Next slide. So there's Jim. So what we do, RCDs are special districts, like a fire district or a school district. So we are government, but we're separate from the county, although our jurisdictions are within counties typically. And we, like I said, we exist to help people help the land. And we do that in 3 ways. The first is through technical assistance. So we provide free, non-regulatory and confidential technical assistance to people who are interested in doing conservation. We implement conservation projects, anything from building ponds to helping a farmer with cover crops, like we're going to talk about today. And then we do a fair amount of outreach and education as well. Next slide. And so although we're started as the Soil Conservation District, our scope has expanded to include different program areas. We're looking at all types of natural resources. And so the programs that we have in San Mateo County are climate, agriculture, water, wildlife, and fire. And I think that's it for me.
Okay.
So I'll stop sharing and then you want to take over, Sacha?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, can you see that okay?
We see the presenter view.
Okay, hold on. How about now? Okay, well, thank you for that introduction, Adria. What I will do in the next 20 minutes or so is I will speak briefly about the relationship between ag, climate change, and soil health, and how agriculture can play a significant role in curbing and reversing the rapid increase of carbon in the atmosphere. So I'll start with this. collection of dramatic photos, which is showing actually where we are. So we've all experienced or witnessed the increased intensity and frequency of extreme weather events, from the wildfires we experienced last year to drought we also experienced in recent years, to intense storms and flooding and changes in the duration and time of extreme heat days, etc. All of these are changes associated with climate change, and greenhouse gases in the atmosphere continue to increase and intensify these effects. The latest reading of atmospheric CO2 is 418 parts per million. And this is about 68 parts per million above what many consider to be the safe threshold of 350 ppm. So we're already in a dangerous territory. And if on top of that, we add the concentrations of methane and nitrous oxide, which are other more potent greenhouse gases, then the situation is actually worse. So this is where we are. And the trend is increasing steadily and will continue to increase unless we act decidedly and at a global scale to change the course. But our goal today is not to leave you with a doom and gloom story. So let's talk about how ag fits into this picture and how it can actually be a big part of the solution, bringing atmospheric carbon back down to safer levels. Like all other industries, ag emits greenhouse gases, accounting for about 10% of the emissions in the US and 8% in California. And these emissions come from things like fermentation in livestock, digestion, manure management, management of nitrogen fertilizer, crop residues, and soil cultivation. And there are practices and opportunities to reduce emissions from these activities, but more importantly, agriculture has the potential to reverse emissions by capturing and locking carbon in the soil and plant biomass. How? Well, we have to first take a look at how carbon cycles through different pools and living systems in our planet, and how agriculture fits in this cycle. So I'd like to start with a short story. Let's see if this works.
My name is Passion Murray, and I make compost in the city of Detroit. I want to share with you a story about soil, farming, and compost, and how it can be a solution for climate change. Climate change is a big problem. It's happening because there's too much carbon in our atmosphere, but carbon is not our enemy. It's the building block of life. Everything alive is made of it. It's us. The problem and the solution are a simple matter of balance. Let's step back and look at the 5 pools where carbon is stored on planet Earth. Starting about 500 million years ago, when plants came onto land, carbon began to cycle in an amazing balance, a balance that allowed for life as we know it to evolve. Then one life form, us, figured out how to extract carbon from the fossil pool. We've been burning it for energy, putting it into play and disrupting that balance. How we manage land and do agriculture is moving even more carbon from the soil and biosphere into the atmosphere. Specifically, we've moved 880 gigatons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which is heating up the planet and destabilizing our climate. Now, the oceans have absorbed a lot of this excess carbon, which is resulting in warming temperatures, acidification, and accelerating a mass extinction of sea life. In order to stop global warming, of course we have to stop burning fossil carbon. The big question is, where do we put the excess carbon to get the cycle back in balance? Remember when I said that soil was a part of the solution? It literally is. Plants, with sunlight and water, perform photosynthesis. They pull carbon in from the air and turn it into carbohydrates, sugars. Then they pump some of those sugars down through their roots to feed microorganisms who use that carbon to build soil. There we go. Carbon moved. The plants pull it in and the soil stores it. Nature's living technology is amazing. Scientists have recently discovered that applying a thin layer of compost one time sets up an ongoing positive feedback loop that brings more and more carbon into the soil each year. In concert with our regenerative practices like not tilling the soil, planting trees and cover crops, and good grazing, we can build and retain gigatons of soil carbon. This is carbon farming. This is regenerative agriculture. More carbon in the ground is good for us. It makes healthy soil. Healthy soil makes for more nutritious food, and it holds way more water, so crops are more resilient in the face of drought. That's good news for families, farmers like me, and everyone that eats. The way we grow our food, fuel, and even our clothes either puts carbon into the atmosphere or pulls it down into the ground. The regeneration of soil is the task of our generation. Our health, the health of the soil, and the health of the planet are one and the same. My name is Fashion Murray.
Okay. So I hope that was inspiring. It's hard to do these things without being able to see your audience, you know. But so soil is one of the major planetary carbon pools, and it's actually about half empty as a result of our long history of soil cultivation. Most cultivated soils around the world have lost more than 50% of their original carbon stocks, which has added to the problem, but also creates a big opportunity now for restoring balance. The opportunity lies in managing soil and crops in a way that promotes and leverages photosynthesis and microbial activity to accelerate carbon capture and storage. So the CO2 that plants take from the air is transformed into sugars and proteins that will stay in the living tissue of the plant. But some of those sugars are also released through the roots, and they feed a complex microbial food web. Soil is a living system. There are more organisms in a handful of healthy soil than there are humans on Earth. So just think of that for a moment. So as those sugars or root exudates enter the soil, carbon becomes bacteria, fungi, protozoans, nematodes, insects. And as these microbes multiply and thrive, nutrients get recycled and stable carbon accumulates. Carbon is the keystone to nutrient cycling and soil fertility in a farm system. So moving carbon from the atmospheric pool to the soil pool addresses the climate change problem, but it also augments farm productivity and resiliency. And this is what we refer to as regenerative ag or climate smart ag. Carbon farming is this idea of moving toward an agriculture that is climate beneficial and builds soil health. And soil health comes down to maintaining thriving and diverse soil microbial communities, which then drive nutrient cycling, improve soil structure, water holding capacity, resistance to erosion, etc. But enough theory. So how does all of this translate into practice, into action? So the Nrcs has come up with a simple but powerful framework to organize actions and practices that can build soil health and carbon capture carbon on farms. They propose 4 basic principles. 1, minimize disturbance. 2, maximize soil cover. 3, maximize biodiversity. And 4, maximize continuous living roots. And each of these principles has a series of conservation practices associated with them, which have proven to be effective and have NRCS standard guidelines and incentives for their implementation. We'll talk more about incentives in a moment. We could dedicate an entire workshop to each of these individual practices, but today we just wanted to offer a general overview, the big picture. So let's talk through some of these and explore how they build organic matter and store carbon. We'll begin with compost. Composting is literally adding organic matter or fairly stable carbon to the soil. This can be done both in crop fields or in rangelands, in grasslands. And composting is one of the practices with largest potential for carbon sequestration, largely because of the composting process itself, because it avoids about 50% of the CO2 emissions that would otherwise result from feedstock materials if they were simply spread over the surface and allowed to decompose. But on top of that, compost additions can trigger a sustained feedback loop or virtuous cycle of carbon sequestration. About 10 years ago, a coalition of researchers and ranchers in Marin County found that if you apply a very thin layer, about ½ an inch of compost on grasslands, the increased levels of nutrients and organic matter builds the capacity for more photosynthesis, which then adds even more carbon to the soil. And they found that this jump in carbon sequestration and the related benefits can last for decades. Adding organic matter or carbon to soil increases its ability to hold water, reduces compaction, and promotes biodiversity. Now, when a soil is disturbed or uncovered, it will release more CO2. It will lose that carbon that's in the soil and release it to the atmosphere. So this next group of practices, cover cropping, crop rotation, reduced tillage, and mulching, all embody these 4 principles of keeping the soil covered, keeping living roots at all times, and also rotating or diversifying the kinds of plants that are interacting with the soil microbes, and in doing that, also diversifying and stimulating in different ways the soil microbes, and preventing disturbance of that. Another group of practices is establishing trees and shrubs along hedgerows or windbreaks, or in silvopasture, which is planting trees on rangeland. So planting woody perennial plants like trees and shrubs sequesters carbon, and the bigger the plant, the more carbon it can capture in its biomass. These plants have bigger root networks, and the soil around them is not disturbed. So in addition to sequestering and storing carbon, these plantings provide habitat for wildlife and pollinators, and protect fields from wind, dust, and sprays, and provide shade for livestock as they build soil health. Restoring riparian areas or native grasslands is another practice that can sequester a significant amount of carbon. Riparian areas are densely vegetated, or can be densely vegetated, which means they have a lot of biomass that can store a lot of carbon. And native grasses have deeper roots and photosynthesize longer throughout the year than non-native or introduced annual species. So these practices, these plantings, provide critical wildlife habitat, protect rangelands and stream banks from erosion, and they also improve soil health. Even managing livestock has carbon benefits. Rotational grazing or holistic management in rangelands or in livestock operations provide resting periods for grasses to recover after they've been grazed, which promotes more organic matter in the soil, more photosynthesis, and this can increase soil carbon storage. And each of these practices has multiple benefits, multiple co-benefits, which are, you can see on this slide on the right column. And many of them, or most of them, have been used in agriculture for centuries, not because of their potential to sequester carbon, but because of these benefits, because it's a good idea. They help ensure a productivity and a good and resilient farming system. So taking all of these ideas I've just glanced over, and the toolkit of practices, which I just listed a few, a coalition of agencies and partners led by the Carbon Cycle Institute in Petaluma, in California, a large number of RCDs, Nrcs, land trusts, and other conservation NGOs and producer groups have come up with this framework, this organizing framework known as carbon farm planning, which is looking at and practicing conservation through a carbon lens. So taking a holistic approach to examine a piece of land, a piece of property, and go through a process to identify opportunities to promote this cycling of carbon through the farm system. So RCDs and others that I just mentioned have been working for the last 6 or more plus years with growers, landowners, to write these carbon farm plans, which follow the NRCS conservation planning process. This is a process, a methodical process where you start by assessing the land, assessing the operations goals, what are the natural resources on the entire property, everything from soil, vegetation, habitat, to ultimately identify opportunities for conservation. The process results in a conservation plan that has specific site recommendations for natural resource enhancement, for integrating carbon farming principles and practices into existing operation goals, specific opportunities to store carbon in soils and vegetation, and a quantitative estimate of the expected greenhouse gas emission reduction, as well as estimated effect on water holding capacity for water conservation. I will skip this slide. I'll save it in case there are questions about the quantification. I'll be happy to answer that at the end, but I will mention that all of this work necessarily has to happen through partnerships. Partnership between agencies like the ones I mentioned, RCDs and Rcs, Carbon Cycle Institute, NGOs, and of course, the farmers, ranchers, and landowners as the center of all this partnership network. And it is a statewide effort. Over the last, I think it's 7 years, all of these players have come together in forming what is a carbon farming network. And together we produce over 100 plans in California, with 49 more underway, which combined are expected, if implemented, are expected to sequester about 1.5 million metric tons of CO2 over 20 years, which is significant and it's encouraging. But it also shows that there's a lot of work ahead and a lot of room for more of this to happen. So to put it in context of some of our state goals or national goals, global goals, California has set targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions to 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. That's only 9 years away, not much time. And more recently, the governor has talked about a goal of achieving carbon neutrality by 2045, which is only 24 years away. And this is ambitious because what it means is that all of the carbon that's released or all of the emissions must be offset by an equivalent amount of sequestration, capture, storage through various economic sectors. So through electricity or energy, transportation, construction, and ag is part of it. So when we look at ag specifically, ag produces or emits about 36 million metric tons of CO2 per year. So in order to achieve carbon neutrality, just in the agriculture sector, we need to be capturing and storing about that much. So when you think about the 1.5 million metric tons that I just mentioned in the previous slide, this might seem like an impossible task, but fortunately, or to give more context to this, according to researchers from the Carbon Cycle Institute, if we were able to apply compost on 5%, only 5% of California grasslands, which is about the percentage that's suitable for this type of practice, we could achieve 30 million metric tons just with that initial application. And this, as I described, can presumably trigger a virtuous cycle that will continue this sequestration over subsequent years. Now, more globally, the French government came up with an initiative of 4 per thousand, which means if every nation around the globe were able to increase soil carbon by 0.4% each year, we would be able to store 75% of the global annual greenhouse gas emissions. And this is enough to make a real dent, a real difference. So we need a lot more carbon farm plants, a lot more photosynthesis, a lot more interested growers and partners to put living soil in action and achieve this target. So I'll leave it at that. And I think in the next section, we're going to talk about incentives and specific programs through which we can help you, if you're a grower, apply these ideas and these practices on your farm. So, and I'll stop sharing.
Okay, great. Thank you, Satya. Jim, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. Let me just see.
So while Casey's booting up the slideshow, I'll just introduce myself. My name's Jim Howard. I'm the district conservationist for the Natural Resources Conservation Service in San Mateo County. And in San Mateo County, we work in close partnership with the San Mateo Resource Conservation District in what's called a local partnership office. We work, our missions are very similar, and we work in very close partnership, leveraging each other's local and federal resources to essentially help anybody who wants to do conservation. Next slide, Casey. As Audrey mentioned earlier, our assistance is non-regulatory, it's confidential, and it's free. And that means that you can invite us onto your land and talk about your resource challenges and concerns, problems, goals, whatever. And there's no threat of enforcement or anybody else getting involved without your permission. And that's very important to us to be able to help anybody who wants our technical assistance. Next slide. So essentially, NRCS does its work in 2 different modes. Technical assistance is essentially anyone who wants help with anything on their land or managing their resources. You can contact us and invite us to your farm or have a phone call or drop by the office and talk to us and get advice or references or opinions. And there's no obligation whatsoever to you. Some of our relationships become long-term relationships where we have follow-up visits, folks check in with us over time, but essentially you can take it or leave it, and that's fine. You know, there's no obligation to requesting our assistance. And if we can't help you, we will refer you to someone who can, or do our best to get you the help that you need. Now, if you move into financial assistance, that's a different animal. And along with financial assistance, you still get the technical assistance. But through our financial assistance, you do move into a different level of scrutiny and obligation to do things that meet the standards and specifications of Nrcs, potentially regulatory requirements of other agencies, because we do have to follow federal environmental compliance rules, National Environmental Policy Act, essentially. Next slide, please. So Sasha mentioned the conservation plan and the planning process. So I'll let you just kind of look at this slide as I describe this vehicle, the conservation plan, which is essentially, if we could do a conservation plan with every one of our customers, that would be our preference, because it's a very comprehensive assessment of a landowner or operator's goals and objectives, challenges, opportunities and constraints, and just a full assessment of a customer's needs on the landscape. And the conservation plan is really a vehicle to move from technical assistance to financial assistance. If you do choose to pursue financial assistance through a Farm Bill conservation program, you will have to have an NRCS conservation plan. And that's your plan. It's a living document. It changes through time based on your changing priorities and needs. It grows. It's your plan and you're the decision maker. But it's a tool that we use to then provide opportunities for customers to access financial assistance to implement conservation practices that are a priority for their agricultural operation. Next slide, please, Casey. So basically, Farm Bill conservation programs, I'm not going to get into any specifics about any of the different programs. There are many. And NRCS has programs designed to help people do conservation and get reimbursed for conservation implemented on their land. The Farm Service Agency, our sister USDA agency, has additional programs that provide farm loans, disaster assistance. There are a lot of different programs. And my message here is a very simple one, and that is, if you believe you would like to pursue financial assistance through the USDA, through the NRCS, contact your local NRCS office and invite us out to your land. Tell us what your goals are and what it is that you're trying to do. And we will do our best to provide you the best avenue to access financial assistance, given your unique needs, capacities, business plan, whatever. One of our primary tools that we use is EQIP. I think a lot of you folks know what EQIP is. It's the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. And that's kind of our bread and butter Farm Bill conservation program. And as I mentioned, there are other programs out there, but it can get complicated. Eligibility requirements can be complicated. There are different requirements, different benefits and whatnot. So my message today is to contact your local NRCS or RCD who work closely with the NRCS and let people know what it is that you would like to accomplish on your land, and we'll try to help you get there. These are the district conservationists for the 3 counties that we are focusing on in this presentation. I want to mention that Adi, who I've got listed there as the Monterey County DC, he was just selected for that position this morning. So he won't be starting until late May, but this is how you can contact him once he does start. And if you need to contact the NRCS in Monterey County prior to that, feel free to call that number or contact me, and I'll help you get connected with the right people. Last thing, just want to give credit to Ron Sturgeon for allowing us to use this photograph, which we get a lot of mileage out of. And I know Ron's on the audience list, and I forgot that I wouldn't be able to talk to you, but I was going to ask him if I took this picture or if this is a picture that he took and let me use. But anyway, I wanted to thank Ron for this photo, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, I'm going to take it from here and talk briefly about the Healthy Soils program. So some of you on here may have heard about this program. It is a program of the California Department of Food and Ag, or CDFA, and it's a competitive grant program. There are 2 programs, the Healthy Soils Program Incentives Program and the Demonstration Projects, but we'll just be talking about the Incentives Program here. The objectives are to build soil organic carbon and reduce atmospheric greenhouse gases. And the program provides financial incentives to California growers and ranchers to implement agricultural management practices that sequester carbon, reduce atmospheric greenhouse gases, and improve soil health. And a little bit more about the program. And this is exciting to hear that it will likely be funded this calendar year. We still don't know for sure yet, but from what we've heard from CDFA, that's, yeah, they're hopeful and planning for it. So, and their plan is hopefully to open up applications in June or July if they do receive that funding, and then there would be another potential round of funding in the winter. This is a 3-year grant, so if you do receive funding, you get into contract with CDFA for 3 years. So if you apply for, say, a compost application, you apply compost every year, you plant cover crop every year. But if you apply for something like a hedgerow, you may just do that for 1 year, and then you have the rest of the years of the grant. And so this grant provides funding to farmers and ranchers on a per unit reimbursement basis, and the amount that you would receive from CDFA varies from practice to practice. So each practice has a different reimbursement rate. And for instance, for compost, you're reimbursed per ton or cubic yard of compost that you apply. And the great thing is that Rcds can help with the Healthy Soils application. I think some of you on this call have actually received technical assistance from either the San Mateo or Santa Cruz Rcds. We can help with the application process, project design, and with project implementation if you're funded. And both, I think both Rcds, I know San Mateo RCD received funding to provide this assistance from CDFA in the past, and we're both actually waiting to hear back about whether or not we receive funding in this next round to provide that technical assistance. But regardless, there will be technical assistance providers to help you if you are interested in applying. And I just wanted to briefly show some examples of some of the eligible practices, really similar to what Satya was mentioning earlier. A lot of different climate smart ag practices that build soil health. And this is not the full list. With the Healthy Soils program, it's broken out into cropland, rangeland, or orchard and vineyard land. And there are different eligible practices within each sort of type of land. And then this is a little bit of information about eligibility. So you have to be a farmer, a rancher, or a federally recognized Native American tribe. You have to implement the practice in a field where it hasn't been implemented before. This was a change last year, which I think was really welcome. So if you have, say 3 fields on your farm and you've applied compost to 2, you are only eligible to apply for funding from CDFA to apply compost on the field that hasn't had compost application on that. And I think it's within the past 1 to 3 years, but maybe Satya or Adria can clarify that later. But we don't want to get too into the nitty gritty. There's definitely a lot of information to understand about the program. So I'm just doing a brief overview. And then these are just kind of some of the other things that there's some of the reporting requirements. You have to list the past 3 years of your crop history. One important one is you do have to have control of the land for the duration of the grant. But if you are, so if you lease the land, you just have to have a letter from your landlord saying that they agree with you participating in the program. And then this was actually something Satya showed briefly, but I wanted to show a little piece of sort of the application process. So this is one of the tools used in the application. This is called Comet Planner. And you can just Google Comet Planner and find this tool online. This is the tool that's specifically used for the Healthy Soils program. And it helps you plan your project. So I use this example here. You have to select which type of cropland you're using, or whether it's cropland, rangeland, or orchard vineyard, which I already did. So I selected cropland and I chose compost application, which is highlighted in the blue. And then I chose my C to N ratio range. And then I chose that it was compost from a certified composting facility. And then this tells you if I apply 15 acres of compost to cropland with that C to N ratio, this is the amount of funding that I could receive from CDFA. So this is a tool that's useful outside of the Healthy Soils program, but also is used in filling out your application to help show the greenhouse gas potential reductions and then how much you would receive from CDFA for implementing that practice. So yeah, that was just a brief overview. And here is our contact information for the RCDs here today for Satya, Audrey, and myself. So please reach out to us if you're interested or have any questions. And I'm going to pass it on to Audria.
So I'll just try and blow through this last one so there's still some time for Q&A. Zero footprint is a relatively new private model to pay farmers for their work sequestering carbon. So doing that public good for everyone. And the way that it was designed, sorry, next slide. The way that it was designed and launched last year was to have restaurants participate in this program, and that there would be an optional upcharge on a customer's receipt that would pay into a fund that then would be distributed to farmers. Shortly after COVID happened, restaurants closed and were hurting. And so they've actually kind of pivoted in the short term and have received philanthropic funds and public grants to do this work. But the idea is still the same, that it's another competitive grant program akin to Healthy Soils that would pay farmers to build soil organic matter and sequester carbon. Next slide. And so one of the differences is instead of a cost per unit reimbursement, you actually propose the cost of your project. And that cost of the project is used to create a total ratio of your carbon cost. And that's how projects are scored with some other things. You can have $25,000 per proposal that you're awarded, or $75,000 over the lifespan of zero footprint, I guess, until they change that. Applications are open right now. They're due on April 22nd. It's a fairly easy application. It's just like a couple pages. It uses some of the tools of healthy soils, like that Comet Planner that Casey was just talking about. Rcds, we can help you put your application together, and you can check out more information at zerofootprint.org. And for those of you who are in San Mateo County, we actually received a donation. So we have some funds specifically for San Mateo County. So it increases your chances a little bit more to get funding. And I think that's it. So we can open it up for Q&A. So Irma asked if zero footprint is only for food crops, and that is the case.
If a question, feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you. Or you can write it in the chat. Joel Kramer asks, and I don't know if I can necessarily answer this question, but can you give examples of carbon with or compost with the C to N ratio greater than 11 or less than 11? You guys have any? I mean, I think it just varies by the feedstock.
Are you asking specifically for cost or the effects of using those different types of compost?
I think it says examples of carbon with C to N ratio. Joel, if you want to verify, or I don't know.
We can maybe look at Comet Planner, but that distinguishes what, yeah, the CN ratio will show you the sequestration rate, but
I think he did clarify. It says, what would be the content of a high carbon versus low carbon compost?
Feedstock with more carbon.
Well, what would be the content? So the content, that's the threshold that that CDFA is using to define low, high, is that 11 C to N ratio. Typically, if the feedstock has a lot of manure that has high nitrogen, so low C to N ratio, then the compost will have a lower C to N ratio. If the feedstock is more yard trimmings or that kind of material that has more carbon, then the C to N ratio will be higher.
And Ruth just added it would be a fungal dominant compost. Does that sound accurate? I'm not sure. There are a few other questions. One from Ruth says, do you know if there's funding for urban projects?
I believe that urban commercial farms are eligible for healthy soils and zero footprint. And I know Jim has also worked with some urban farming projects through Nrcs.
Yeah, we do. We help any ag operation that wants help. It's been a bit of a struggle providing useful financial assistance to urban operations just due to the scale of things and the general needs of urban operations. But we do visit folks here and there that are doing urban farming and try to help them as much as we can. But if what they need is if it's just not worth it to go through our process to get a few $100s or so to help with some small thing, we try to give them as much information as they can to make an informed decision. But we are working on that. Urban farming is becoming a higher priority with Nrcs nationwide now.
And there's a question that Audrey answered, but there's a question about silvopasture. And Richard asked, does the grower get to select the species or density planted? And Audrey said mostly yes. And then
can I add to that a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah, we as we work with our customers, it's understood that the customer is the decision maker. You are the decision maker, and what we do is try to help you make informed decisions. And if you have specific desires of the design of some conservation practice, we are going to honor that as much as we can. If it does get a little bit sideways with our standards and specifications or the requirements of the funding source, we may have to morph it a little bit, but basically you're the decision maker.
Okay, and there's a few other questions about compost that Audrey has answered. One about on-farm produced compost and whether it's more or less valuable in terms of reimbursement than compost from a certified facility. And Audrey responded, Healthy Soils program has the same reimbursement rate for compost and zero food print, you name your cost. And then a question about—
Can I chime in there?
Yeah.
Irma, that, you know, this is a new realm, carbon farming and compost application on farm and pasture and rangeland. But certainly compost produced on site and not hauled around and processed here and there and distributed is certainly a higher value product conceptually. And we're trying to get to the place where we are producing the product as close to the site where we're doing the treatment as possible. And I think the mechanism for that will be just the certification process, whatever the specs are of what that compost has to be, so that we can use things closer to the source.
Question just came in the chat. If you own ag land but have not farmed it, can you still find funding programs to help get you started?
The programs that exist right now, this is challenging, but the programs that exist right now are aimed at farmers who already have been farming, and that's not helpful for people who are trying to start farming in a regenerative way. So these programs are not necessarily the best, but if you contact your local RCD, they might be able to tell you about some other opportunities to access funding.
And then, Jim, did you have anything to say for that?
Yeah, I wanted to say that I think the what I find to be our most valuable asset in helping people help the land is just knowing folks and understanding what their operations are and what they're trying to do. And we are often in possession of funding for specific resource concerns or with specific goals. And we may actually call you and say, hey, we have money here and we remember that you're trying to do hedgerows and cover crops on your land. Do you want to get in on this program and fund those? That happens a lot. So yeah, I think the value, there's a lot of value in just having a relationship with either the RCD or the NRCS. It can bring surprising benefits.
We'll add to get started or to access land. There are also financing programs. So through California Farm Link or even the Farm Services Agency can loan money at lower interest rates to get an operation going, and then once the operation is going, most of these programs can jump in.
And we have one more question, I think, about whether or not zero footprint requires compost from a certified facility or certified compost producer. And
So I tried to put something in the chat. I don't believe that there's a requirement for that from zero footprint, but when you are applying compost, it would be a good idea to have some understanding of the content and qualities of that compost, which is certified compost requires some standards in how the compost is produced, but also some testing so you can access that information like the CN ratio.
yeah, and I think that's it, unless I'm missing some.
Great timing because it's 8:02.
All right, well, thanks everyone who was able to join, and we'll send out a link of the recording if you want to watch it again or share it with friends.
Watch it again.
Yeah. Okay.
And I was going to say, if you didn't get a chance to write down our emails, you can just visit the San Mateo RCD website or Santa Cruz RCD website.
Well, thank you all for joining.
Thanks, everybody.